So to get started, let's do a quick round of introduction for our project team. So again, I'm Nguyen. I've been the project lead on the missing middle housing study for the past year and a half. Yeah, I'm excited to share this milestone with you all, where we have our preliminary recommendations for review, for public review, after two and a half years of working on this and having this conversation with the community. So I will turn over to Greg, my boss.
Good evening, everyone. Greg Sandlin, Planning Director with the City of Sacramento. My role in this project is mainly just one of support. I'm just trying to stay out of the way of the good work of staff and the consultants. I will turn it over to Mitali.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mithali, and I'm the project manager. I work in Opticos Design, and we are very excited to be presenting some of these recommendations today. I will pass it over to the remaining members of my team. Roger, first you, then Patricia.
Hi, I'm Roger Foreman. I'm a senior designer with Opticos Design.
Hi, my name is Patricia. I'm a senior designer in Opticos Design too, and I'm excited to this one. Welcome. I will pass it on to Alex.
Good evening, everyone. Alex Steinberger. I'm a principal with Cascadia Partners. We are a subconsultant to Opticos working on this project, and I'm an urban planner and an economist, and you'll be hearing from me today as well as Nguyen.
Thank you, everyone. All right, so just some housekeeping items. So how this webinar will be run is we'll first have a 30-minute presentation. So Alex and myself will be sharing information with you. And then we'll take a 15-20-minute break for Q&A. Mostly kind of when we want to hear if you have any clarifying questions on definition or terminology or the concepts or the recommendations, that's what we're looking for. If you have any comments or input, feel free to share them. But the best place to share them would be on the online workshop, as we'll have a record of those comments. And after that, we'll transition over to our demonstration. We'll do a quick demo of how to provide input through our online workshop. And then we'll have a Q&A right after that on that item. And during the Q&A, we have the raise hand feature on Zoom that I'm sure most of you are familiar with. Feel free to also drop your questions or comments in the chat box. And for everyone who's just joined us, this meeting is being recorded so that those who can't make it tonight can view it at a later time. And so before I begin with my presentation, just in order to have a smooth meeting, just a few group agreements that I want to go over with everyone. I'm sure we're all familiar with these agreements. It's trying to be concise when you speak, staying on topic to the meeting purpose, and then also allowing space for others to participate and speak. We all want to be good listeners, active listening, be respectful of one another, no personal attacks. And we do ask that if this is something that you're interested in and if you have opinions on, please do provide your input through the online workshop. And Roger and Patricia, can one of you drop the Conveyo link in the chat box? I think that'll be helpful for folks. So then with that, let me get started with the presentation. So I'll start with an overview. So just to kind of recap what we've done so far with the project. So during the last webinar on October 5th, we presented the built form recommendations that were focused on how missing middle housing can blend in well with existing neighborhoods with the right balance of controls and incentives. We talked about recommendations that addresses concerns about the size and scale of these buildings, how we can ensure that there's enough space for both new housing and trees in our communities, and how we can encourage more active uses of the front yard space to foster a greater sense of community in these projects. So that was the webinar 1. So now this is webinar 2. But for those who may not be familiar with this effort, who is joining us today, I do want to spend a little bit of time providing a brief overview of the project. And then after that, I'll turn it over to Alex, and he'll be going over, he'll be providing a deeper dive presentation on the attainability and ownership preliminary recommendations that's coming out of this study. So in the next few slides, I will provide a brief overview of what missing middle housing is and why the city is studying this strategy. So the impetus for this was back in 2021, our city council approved a 2040 general plan key strategy to look at allowing a greater array of housing types citywide. And in response, through a grant from the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, the city commissioned this missing middle housing study to explore how this strategy can be implemented in Sacramento. There are two phases to the study. The first phase, which we completed last year, was focused on sharing information about missing middle and gathering initial feedback from the community. In phase two, we've used the input that we've heard so far and all the analysis that we've done so far to develop a set of what we're calling preliminary recommendations, which will of course be refined based on the community input that we hear from this round of feedback. And we'll be using that input to develop the study's final zoning and design standard recommendations to reallow missing middle in our city. So early next year, in terms of next steps, the final recommendations will be presented to the Planning Design Commission and City Council for another round of review, which will, of course, inform code revisions that will occur after the 2040 General Plan is adopted by Council, which we're anticipating will happen in spring of next year. The findings of the study will be shared in the form of 4 key reports. Both the informational report and the attainability and livability analysis have been completed and are available on the project website. The third report, which we're working on finalizing now, is a displacement risk assessment, and we're hoping to complete that by December. And the study's final recommendations will be shared in the last report early next year, which, as I mentioned earlier, will inform updates to to the city's planning and development code. Some definition slides here. So what does missing middle housing mean? For the purpose of this study, we're talking about neighborhood scale buildings that contain more than one home. And that includes duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes. We're also expanding that to include accessory dwelling units, bungalow courts, and small homes on small lots, ideally located in walkable and well-connected areas. Essentially, these are housing types that have been banned in the majority of residential neighborhoods throughout America through the practice of what we call single-family zoning, which currently accounts for 70% of the city's residential zoned land, hence why they are missing. Missing middle housing types are considered middle in terms of form and size. They fall somewhere between the single family product and the large apartment complexes. They also typically deliver lower cost housing options for households that are considered middle income or middle class, including many of the city's working class families. This is not a new concept at all. These housing types were once common in early cities across America. And even today, there are over 3,500 existing examples throughout Sacramento's older neighborhoods. In the same way that old triplexes, fourplexes, and bungalow courts still standing due today, missing middle can help to provide attainable housing options that can help to house our aging and older adults who are retired and are looking for affordable options to downsize, our college-aged population that are currently forced to either cram themselves into crowded living arrangements or they're forced to stay with their parents, our multi-generational households wishing to live near one another, and people in many other stages of life and situations. Some characteristics of missing middle. They typically they provide smaller, more attainable unit sizes. They tend to foster a greater sense of community through shared open space areas, and they support a more sustainable car-free environment by providing housing closer to employment, transit, and amenities, which helps to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and air pollution. What's neat about missing middle at the scale that the city's proposing is that they can blend in well with existing neighborhoods by enabling small incremental changes that happens gradually through activities like garage conversions, second-story additions, partitioning of existing larger homes, and through accessory dwelling units. So the next few slides, we want to talk about our engagement framework and how you can provide your input. We want to hear from you. The city has been having this conversation with the community for almost 3 years now, and residents have shared what they think could be challenges to implementation. This includes concerns around neighborhood scale and compatibility, on-site open space, trees, and attainability of these units. The concerns we heard can be captured by these 3 key questions that you see on the screen, which is also how the preliminary recommendations have been categorized. The first question is, what could missing middle housing look like in Sacramento? That question was covered on the last webinar, which was recorded. So if you didn't see that one, you can view that on our project website. Today, we'll be focused on the second 2 questions, which is, will missing middle be lower cost and attainable? And how can the city promote home ownership and address potential displacement through a missing middle strategy? And each of these questions are addressed by accompanying recommendations, as you see on the online workshop. So our self-guided online workshop, you see the link is on the screen there. They contain the detailed preliminary recommendations. It's available for public participation until November 3rd. And for those who just joined us, Roger and Patricia, can you drop that link again in the chat box for those who just joined us recently?
Yeah, it's there.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Roger. So this online workshop is structured similarly to the draft 2040 General Plan online workshop, where folks are welcome to review the content at their own pace and provide feedback. Regarding next steps, staff will be presenting to City Council on Tuesday, October 24th, this upcoming Tuesday. The input and feedback that we receive on these preliminary recommendations will help us to refine and shape the final recommendations, which we're hoping to be able to share early next year. And once the 2040 General Plan is adopted in spring of next year, staff will begin work on co-revisions to implement this study's recommendations. And before I end my presentation, I just want to share with you all the 3 factors that we are using to measure the success of the city's missing middle framework. We believe that for the city's missing middle framework to be successful, we must ensure that these new homes are feasible and can actually be constructed, that they are attainable and can help reduce housing costs in a region, and that they fit in well and even can enhance our many communities in Sacramento. And the goal of the study is to really find that sweet spot, the right balance in the city's approach as we think about re-allowing these missing middle housing types. And so with that, I will now turn it over to Alex, who will be going into a deeper dive presentation on the recommendations that responds to question 2 and 3, as you saw earlier.
Thanks, Nguyen. And again, for those who did not catch this at the beginning, my name is Alex Steinberger, and I am a principal with Cascadia Partners. We're a subconsultant to Opticos, and we are responsible for helping answer these second 2 questions, trying to figure out whether missing middle housing can be a lower cost alternative to quote unquote traditional single family homes, and how we can use missing middle housing to help promote home ownership and prevent potential displacement in the city of Sacramento. So one of the things that we wanted to look at was, will missing middle housing and will a missing middle strategy really produce lower cost and more attainable housing in Sacramento? And what we found reinforces the idea that missing middle housing is not just the middle in terms of its scale and intensity, but it's also in the middle in terms of the incomes needed to afford to live in it. And we also explored ways to encourage small scale builders to provide more deeply affordable units for households earning below these middle incomes. Before we talk about whether missing middle housing is attainable, we first probably should define what we mean by attainable. When we say housing is attainable, we mean that that households within a certain income group can afford to own or rent that housing without spending more than 30% of their income on a monthly rent or mortgage payment. When we say that middle housing is attainable to middle income households, we mean those earning between 60% and 110% of the area median income adjusted for household size in Sacramento County. And so as you can see from this chart, that varies depending on the number of people per household, but it's anywhere from between $45,000 a year on the low end for a one-person household to $117,000, almost $118,000 per year for a four-person household on the high end. So we are really interested in seeing if missing middle housing can help fulfill the needs of these households in particular, but also trying to find ways for it to achieve even deeper affordability, which we'll talk about in a moment. So we did some testing. We used a tool called a real estate pro forma, which is the same thing that a developer uses to figure out if a project is financially feasible, to see if missing middle housing could achieve this middle scale of affordability. And what we found was really encouraging. We used local market information for Sacramento, local housing costs, local permitting fees, all of those things. And we found that for a single family detached house, as expected, you'd need a very high income to afford to live in that kind of a dwelling. In fact, you'd need about 300% of area median income to afford to live in that kind of a housing unit. So definitely not a product type that's appropriate for that middle scale of incomes. But as you go deeper into the spectrum of missing middle housing, especially as you get into triplexes and fourplexes, we see that we are actually able to design these units and have them be affordable to these middle incomes while still generating an adequate rate of return for a real estate developer or builder. Another way to think about this is in terms of the types of incomes that are able to afford to live in different types of homes. If we take those same four examples from the previous slide, the single family home, the duplex, the fourplex, and the ADU, we see that they are not all created equal in terms of who they are affordable to. And we looked at different types of workers in the Sacramento region and the incomes that they typically make. And what we see here is that in order to live in the single family home and pay even close to 30% or less of your income on housing costs, you need to earn more than a doctor in Sacramento. And if you're a police officer or a teacher, someone with a lower or more moderate income, you're not even going to be coming close to affording to live in that kind of a dwelling unit. But as we get into the duplex and the fourplex and the ADU, we can see that these housing types do create opportunities for the police officer, for the teacher, and folks of more modest means to afford to own or rent a home. So now that we've established how missing middle could provide housing options to rebalance the housing market, which has typically been skewed towards more expensive housing types for many decades, we want to also understand whether enabling this housing type would actually allow builders to build in a more economical and feasible way. From a feasibility standpoint, simply allowing more units per lot is not enough. We know that. There are other aspects of zoning and building code that need to be changed in order to truly make missing middle housing more feasible. And we have some really good examples from other communities that I'll talk about where we can see what's worked and what hasn't. One thing that's important to understand is that missing middle housing doesn't operate on the same equal playing field as detached single family homes. As you can see in this example, if we take a 5,200 square foot lot in Sacramento and we give a builder the option to build a fourplex, a triplex, a duplex, or a single family home, it's likely that they're going to choose the single family home and to build the largest single family home that they can under the current code. There's a number of reasons for this that I'll talk about in just a minute, but the key here is that just by enabling fourplexes and triplexes and duplexes doesn't mean that we are encouraging them. And there are things, as I said, that can be done to ensure that the builder is more likely to pick an option with smaller and more numerous units. So as I mentioned, the playing field for these two building types is not even. Even if you were to allow the same amount of square footage or floor to area ratio for a single family home or a fourplex, you'd imagine that a builder may consider those an equal proposition, when in fact, that's not the case. There are factors such as the ease of financing detached single family homes, the lower construction costs associated with those homes, lower fees and faster permitting, and just a lack of familiarity with missing middle housing in the developer community in Sacramento and in most cities in the United States that really skews the playing field, so to speak, more towards the detached single family home. And so we really need to be very cognizant of this and try to take some steps to re-equalize this paradigm so that we can encourage builders to choose missing middle housing more often than they choose the single family home. So one way that we can do that is by limiting the overall achievable square footage of single unit structures and allowing more square footage the more units you add to a lot. This is often called a sliding scale floor to area ratio approach. And in this same example, as we showed before, on a 5,200 very typical single family lot in Sacramento, if we restrict the amount of floor to area ratio that a single family home can achieve, but increase that amount for each additional unit that a builder decides to build on a lot, then we start to level the playing field. In that instance, we sort of block or truncate from the market the largest, most expensive homes and make the missing middle product, which tends to produce smaller, more attainable housing units, we make that the more attractive proposition for a builder. And there are some really good examples that we can point to of this working in other communities. In Portland, Oregon, they just recently implemented a very similar strategy through their residential infill project, which was adopted in 2021 and has shown really great promise as a way to help make missing middle housing more feasible. Portland has seen a tremendous increase in missing middle housing production since the program took effect. In fact, in its first year, missing middle housing types became the dominant building types being permitted in Portland's residential zones. Between the summers of 2021 and 2022, roughly 340 middle housing units were permitted. And during that same time, in the same zones, only 78 single unit dwellings were permitted. So what you saw in Portland is because they reduced the maximum size that single family homes could achieve, builders took that and decided that they could be better off financially if they started building more smaller units per lot. And it didn't take really any time at all. It was immediate. And if they hadn't instituted the same FAR cap, the sliding scale FAR that we just described, it's likely that they would not have seen such dramatic uptake of missing middle housing. So what could this look like in Sacramento? Well, here's an example of how a sliding scale FAR could work in the proposed tiers that have been discussed in previous webinars. And again, as Nguyen mentioned, there's a previous webinar that is hosted on the city's website that you can check out where they dive into much more depth into where these tiers are and what they would consist of. But suffice it to say, there are proposed to be 3 tiers where missing middle housing would be permitted, with different amounts of dwelling units permitted per lot in each tier. And as you can see in this table, the amount of floor to area ratio, again, that's the square footage you can build on a lot, would increase with each additional unit that is built on the lot. And in addition to that, ADUs, auxiliary dwelling units, would be exempted from that cap. And the FAR would also include non-habitable spaces such as garages. This table and this recommendation was calibrated using local market data, and it was calibrated using lot sizes that are typical in Sacramento to ensure that these floor to area ratio caps will still allow for reasonably sized units to be built. So we think that this table and these recommendations would help tip the scale in favor of missing middle housing in a similar way as was seen in Portland, and would result in some pretty dramatic uptake in missing middle housing in Sacramento. So we've talked about how missing middle housing without any subsidy can produce housing that is attainable to those making between 60% and 110% of area median income. But how could we use missing middle housing to produce units that are even more deeply affordable to those making below 60% of area median income? Well, under a proposed framework, there's a proposal for a missing middle strategy that could provide this type of housing without public subsidy. We know that the state's density bonus law already provides an incentive for income restricted units, but it only applies to projects with 5 or more primary units, leaving out many of the projects that are in the missing middle scale of housing. So one approach the city is considering is a local bonus program specifically tailored to projects with 4 primary units or less. The way that program could work is that in exchange for providing income restricted units within a project, so units that are affordable to households earning less than 60% of AMI, for instance, the city could provide a bonus unit or units or bonus floor to area ratio. To be successful, this would need to be calibrated so that it provides a tangible incentive to developers. A local missing middle housing bonus program could help produce long-term regulated affordable housing if structured properly. And it could also help produce housing in mixed income projects without any public subsidy. So we think this is a really exciting prospect. It's still being worked out and still being calibrated and still sort of at the conceptual stage, but will be further fleshed out as we get more input from the public. As we explore the potential of a local bonus program, it's again helpful to look at similar success stories. And we have a really good example right here in the state of California from the city of San Diego, where they recently updated their zoning to allow property owners to build more ADUs than permitted by state law in exchange for building additional income restricted units. The way that program works is that for every income restricted ADU a property owner builds, they can build 1 additional market rate ADU. Similar to Portland, this program has been really, really successful, and in its first year produced nearly 300 regulated affordable ADUs in San Diego neighborhoods. So as a concept, through a local missing middle bonus program, we think the city could encourage builders to incorporate regulated affordable units between 60 to 80% of area median income, and as well as that, units that would accept housing choice voucher tenants for a certain number of years. Staff is introducing this as a preliminary recommendation and a broad conceptual idea. We're not making specific recommendations at this time, but again, The specific details of this program will be shaped over the coming months through the input that we receive from the public and from boards and commissions. Another key concern residents expressed in early rounds of engagement is the risk of displacement. City staff is exploring ways to promote home ownership opportunities and encourage investment and capital to flow into our underserved communities, while still being able to protect and preserve existing affordable housing stock in these areas. It's important to note that there is some research and data from other cities, such as Portland, who have pursued a similar strategy, suggesting that a missing middle housing strategy that allows a greater array of housing types over a broad geographic area, again, not small and targeted, but broad and citywide, can help alleviate regional displacement over long periods of time. One of the reasons why this happens is because in a market where housing tends to only serve higher income households, middle income households tend to compete for the attainable housing that is available for lower income households. So if we can broaden that pool of middle income attainable housing, that lessens that pressure on those more affordable units. In response to the displacement concerns we heard from the public, we've done a lot of research to understand who is at risk. There are a number of risk factors for displacement that can be mapped and understood at the neighborhood level. And we're helping the city undertake an analysis to understand where there are concentrations of households with these risk factors so that we can be proactive when we're making any changes to zoning to allow more units. The findings of this analysis will be shared in report 3 of this study, and it'll be called the Displacement Risk Assessment. This report 3 will help us further build in anti-displacement measures and make necessary refinements to missing middle housing recommendations. Homeownership is also a critical wealth building tool to help residents withstand displacement pressure. The rules the city is contemplating would make it easier for existing homeowners to add to their properties, creating more opportunities for revenue to help them build wealth and withstand displacement pressure. In addition, since middle housing can produce ownership housing at much lower price points than large single-family homes, it can also create opportunities for renters who wish to transition into home ownership. Many of us are probably familiar with the 3 Ps of anti-displacement: produce more housing, preserve existing affordable housing stock, and protect our vulnerable residents. These 3 Ps we think can be addressed through the missing middle housing program because they will allow for more housing production through the FAR sliding scale that we've proposed. They will help produce more housing through a local bonus program, and they will help protect and preserve by including requirements related to tenant occupied housing, requiring certain time periods for units before they are demolished if they've been tenant occupied, and blocking development proposals that result in less units. Homeownership is typically a pathway to building generational wealth. Historically, discriminatory housing policies such as redlining and race-based zoning have denied equal home ownership opportunities to Black families in areas where home prices have greatly appreciated. As I mentioned earlier, one of the recommendations for this project is reducing minimum size requirements for new parcels. And one of the reasons why housing is costly to construct is largely because of the price of land. So this should help address that issue. We are hopeful that this will lower barriers to home ownership opportunities and enable more affordable home ownership options such as small cottage villages, tiny homes, and especially some of the growing innovations around modular and prefab technology. There are also a few longer-term efforts that the city is considering, including a condo conversion ordinance and fee deferral program. And staff has acknowledged that zoning and planning standards are only one piece of the puzzle when it comes to enabling middle housing. There are other issues such as financing, building code requirements, condominium liability law, and many other factors that are outside of the city's direct control, but that the city can act as an advocate for in order to help eliminate these barriers.
So if you visit the city's missing middle housing website, at the very center of the page, this is what it'll look like. You see this blue rectangular button that says Enter Self-Guided Online Workshop. So if you click on there, it will take you to our online workshop. And it's structured very similarly to the Draft 2040 General Plan. If you are familiar with that online workshop that was recently, it was open for almost 3 months, I believe, recently closed for input. But it's operating very similar. We have an overview introductory paragraph up here. The idea is that the same 3 questions that we presented to you over the course of these 2 webinars are the same 3 questions that we're sort of focusing our recommendations and input on. And we do ask that you provide some information about yourself in the welcome station. Just 3 quick questions to kind of give us a sense of, who's responding. Are we doing a good job at engaging with folks? Are we getting all the neighborhoods? And just giving us a gauge of how successful and how effective we've been with our outreach. So if you can fill that out, that would be awesome. We appreciate that. And so once you complete the welcome station, you see there's 3 stations here. Again, each station corresponds to one of the key questions. And so if we start at station 2, since that was one of the topics that we covered today, it might take up to a minute to load because it is a larger file. But this is station 2. And you'll see that a PDF will populate on your screen. And it's very similar to a workshop board. If you've been to a community workshop, a more traditional one, you'll have these boards up. And so this is sort of just a virtual form of that. So if you look through the board, read through the content, and if you have any comments or input or even questions, you can select this icon up here with the kind of like the dialogue bubbles. You click on that, and your cursor will turn into a sort of like that addition sign. So let's say you want to provide an input on this particular strategy here. You can click there. You can put your name, email, and then add your comment or question there, and you click post. And that way we'll track all the comments that we're receiving and all the input that we're receiving through that way. The same with the other stations. And so once you complete reviewing this station, you can move on to the other station by clicking proceed to station 3 down here. And yeah, very, very similar, the same exercise, wait for it to load, read through the content, and provide your input anywhere on the poster board that works for you. And then once you complete all 3 stations, you can click up here back to home. It will take you back to the home page. You can scroll down right below the 3 stations. There is a sort of a quick polling survey question. This question is really about, based off of what you've read and what we've presented to you through the online workshop, how supportive are you of the general approach? And so this will give us a gauge of how effective and how successful we have been responding to the concerns and the challenges that have been raised by the community. And based on the input that we received through this online workshop, then we'll, like I mentioned earlier, refine and make adjustments to respond to the input, and we'll be coming back in 3 to 4 months with a final set of recommendations. I believe that is it. Oh, and if you are interested and would like to stay up to date on our project, please feel free to subscribe to our email list. We do send out email blasts occasionally, and especially when we have an outreach push like we have this month of October, you'll be getting emails from us to update whenever we have a new release of a report or we have a public meeting coming up. We'll let you know through the emails.